Hello guys. A couple of people on Wild Ox Discord channel has been asking, you know, about the couch co-op multiplayer template, and there's been a few questions. I'm gonna go ahead and hit play and talk through some of them. So you'll see here in the top corners, or I said top corners, but in the corners you'll see player one press enter, and then you'll see player two press start, player three press start, player four press start. Someone mentioned that they had 5 players, and more than likely what's happening is they're not skipping the keyboard player. So by default the project settings are set to where the first player is a keyboard player and the rest of them are controllers, and that's just due to like for debugging purposes. But you can set that in your project settings to skip the keyboard player, and you have to plug a controller in at that point, and you won't end up with 5 players at that point. The other thing I want to mention is we'll take a look at the world settings here, because this is going to kind of help clarify how this is set up and what it's doing. So by default, the engine, what it wants to do is give you a default pawn class. But in order for drop in and drop out functionality to work, you have to have player controllers in the world spawned into existence listening for inputs, right? Because you have to have a controller in order to issue inputs, and then that controller then issues those inputs to a possessed character. So basically there are these input detectors that are spawned, and that's handled in the game mode. So all of this logic is kind of overriding that default pawn. So we'll go take a look at that game mode real quick. So the game mode, to break this down, and we'll just come to the event begin play, it basically says, get the number of player starts and store them. Then it says spawn detectors, which those are the input detectors, and assign an index to those, and possess them and wait for input. Then after that, it's going to say create the BPW player select panel widget, which that is what's going to be added to the viewport and allow you to do the player start thing, right? And then once you go through that process, it's going to spawn your player. So all of this logic's in the game mode. And as you can see here, the default class is your third person character class, right? So that's kind of an overview of what the system is doing, and can kind of get your head around that. Now on to the subject matter of, excuse me, I'm sorry, being able to swap that mesh out, right? So without digging into the game mode, this is a nifty little trick, and I just want to kind of show people this. If we go ahead and spawn in, and this works for any marketplace assets that you may have picked up. If you want to understand what character really quick, you can hit the play key to test an editor, and then you can hit F8 to kind of jump out of your body, so to speak, and now you're back in kind of fly around editor mode. If you highlight the class at that point, it'll tell you, right? And then you can browse to the asset. So that's another really quick way to understand, like, no matter how many loops you go through in order, or should I say function calls you go through, that's how you ultimately can get to what your character is really fast. So now we understand the third person character is the base class for the template, right? And it's just a standard character with some material functions on it, and there's a setup player parameter function call that issues the dynamic material color parameter. So that's how it's changing out those colors. Now, we don't have any other meshes here, so I'm gonna jump out really quick and we'll just take care of that really fast. I'm gonna go to library, and I'll just pick something that I can add real quick to the project. There's There's this Knights pack. It's kind of small. We'll add that. It's a good use case example. And I don't need this local content anymore. I don't like bloating my hard drive with a bunch of cached stuff. So now we have the Polygon Night stuff here, right? And this is where it takes a little bit of study. And so I see that there's two skeletons here. We have UE4 mannequin skeleton, and then we have the character Knight skeleton. So let's see what... Yeah, we don't have any meshes associated with this skeleton. So I don't know why they included it in there. Doesn't look like... doesn't look like there's anything useful on it. So... it also looks like they have like an updated rig skeleton here. So this is where studying your content's going to be useful. What I'm going to do, because I already know what the third person character is, and it looks like this guy's already set up for a humanoid rig, and looks like they already have the fingers done too, so that's going to be the easiest thing, right? So if you're not familiar with Retarget Manager, basically you select a rig. If you don't have one, you can add one. But by default, you can usually select a humanoid rig, and it'll go through and set these up, and you just kind of study them and make sure they get assigned to the right bones, right? Once that's done and the skeleton is saved, you can go to the character that you know you're using, which in our case is the third person character. So it's here. And then you can go to the mesh and you can say, okay, where is my animation blueprint that this guy is using? And this is, the easiest way to kind of just jump to this really quick. If you right click that and retarget it, the entire animation blueprint. At this point, you should be able to select the right skeleton, which I knew that was it, SK's character Knight. And then what I usually do is change the directory that I want this going to. So I'm going to make a new folder called animations here. And I'm just going to retarget all of those, like the entire blueprint out to animations. And it looks like it ignored me and stuck it where it wanted to stick it, which is under snow for whatever reason. But the great thing is I have all these little asterisks next to it. I'll just move it in there. I likely didn't pay attention to what I was doing. Anyway, I'll open this up and look at him. He looks like he's pretty good, right? The next step that I like to do is I'm going to go change this out with the Knight and make sure that I pick the right. That's the updated rig. That's the one I want. And because the animation, of course, was retargeted, it's not going to be renamed. So for simplification, I'm going to rename this just so that I can tell which one is my animation blueprint that I'm wanting to use. Right, so that's a quick, easy, dirty way to get where you want to go. Right, so now we have our mesh changed out on our character, and he's just hard-coded at this point, right? We also have this dynamic material reference that is set up for element 0. Let's go look at him. He's got 2 here, so we need to make sure we set this back to the default, right? So now the color is not going to update on him. He's just hard-coded to what he is. It doesn't matter what color we pick. He's going to always be that mesh with the default material that he uses. And I can explain why that is in a second. So the setup player parameter is what's handling this mesh material instance and the color, right? So because the color parameter doesn't exist on the material for that character, it's just not being set. That's the reason why it's no longer doing the color. So that's just to clarify that. All right. So now that we have him set up and retargeted, we're going to look back at the game mode and we're going to say, okay, what are we doing, right? And we know that we are spawning detectors first and foremost, and we know that these input detectors are what's handling the logic for the controller to pick your color, right? Because that's the only thing that exists. You don't have a player character at that point. You don't have a normal controller at that point. So let's go look at these input detectors. So on the start button pressed, we check to see if there's a player child reference, and if there is one, it spawns the player. If there isn't one, it's going to show the menu. So we already know, okay, well, this is where the menu is getting called. And it's for each one of these input detectors, it gets the index and it sets the player child reference, right? So let's go look at add player and see what it's doing. Okay, well, it's creating a player child widget, adding it to the blue viewport, and it's adding child to the uniform grid of the parent widget, right? So let's go look at this widget. Let's see what it looks like. Okay, so there's the color, right? So if we look at the input graph, it's doesn't look too complicated. It looks like it's getting a color array, and it's incrementing that array on player choice, and then it's setting the color of the widget, right? And then here, it's setting the text name for the text parameter, and then getting the player choice and setting the brush color. So pretty simple stuff. And obviously this is where you would want to go and set up your mesh, right? So if you don't want to be destructive and you want to keep this, you can duplicate this and change the functionality without being destructive and use it as a guide. Or you can kind of basically do this logic in your head and replace everything that exists. I'm more of a non-destructive type of guy because there's no telling if I'm gonna want this or not. I usually play it safe and have a way to kind of come back to the original thing. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and duplicate this because I know the logic is going to be fairly similar. So instead of player child, we'll name this player child mesh, right? And we know that we're gonna want to represent the character in some way, shape, or form. Now I kind of cheated and went and took some screenshots. So underneath my Polygon Nights, under characters, I'm gonna create another folder, and I'm gonna name this mesh textures, or player textures. Let's call it that, player textures. And let me go find them. I have the knight and the soldier, and I'll just drag them in over here, right? So to kind of show you what I did here, how I created these, and again, you can do a render target and spawn the mesh and use a capture component to render out to a target and use that instead of just a hard-coded texture. It's really up to you how you want to do that, but this is the quicker way to kind of demonstrate this. But how I did it, and I'm gonna talk on this a little bit, is when you open up your character here, you can come into your environment settings and you can say, I don't want to show environment, I don't want to show the floor, and I want my background to be something photo friendly. And you're going to get this weird little effect here that's post-processing doing its thing. It's going to be like, hey, I'm trying to correct exposure. So what I do just in this preview scene here is go hard code the max brightness and min brightness to 1, and it gets rid of that auto exposure. And I use the snippet tool to snip this, but you know, you just type in snipping tool and you can kind of draw this out and snip it, right, and save it. Now I do want to talk about optimization because a lot of people don't understand. For this example, I didn't use power of 2, but you really do want to do a 256 or 512 or a power of 2 for optimization purposes. Like you can, 32 by 32, just anything that's a power of 2, you really want to utilize that. So for this demo here, or should I say tutorial, I didn't do that, but you guys really, whenever you use Photoshop or Paint or something, to make sure that when you save that image out, it's a 32 by 32 or like 56 by 50, like a power of 2. 64 by 64, like a power of 2 for optimization purposes. You really want to do that. So in this child mesh that I made here, we're not going to need color anymore. So I'm actually going to keep that there because I want to see the settings. And I'm going to add an image. And it looks like it's just filling. Yeah, it's just filling. So we can just get rid of this. Yes, and we're going to get the image and we're going to say fill. And I'm going to rename this to player image. And it is a variable, so we're good there. And I'm going to hit compile and we're going to blow up, right? And we're going to blow up because there's a couple of things in here that we need, but this is the easiest way to kind of step through this and understand what we're doing. And that's why I said I like being non-destructive, because as you make changes and you do this and you hit compile and something gives you a warning, it steps you through this so you can say, okay, what do I need to do to fix this? Okay. So instead of colors now, we know that we're going to have a player texture or an image, and we're going to have meshes. Instead of doing this, like I want to be able to keep the player choice as a single array. So instead of using 2 different arrays and doing 2 gets, I'm going to show you a way that you can do this with a struct. That's pretty handy. So we know we want an image to represent what we're showing, and we want a mesh to be able to set on the character, right? So underneath Couch Co-op, I'm just going to make a new folder, and I'm going to name this structs. Kind of keeps things organized. And we'll go over here and we'll go to blueprints, and we're going to create a structure, and I'm just going to call this the player mesh struct. Or let's do player select struct. Now we have an image we know, which is going to be a 2D texture, because we know that's what the our texture 2D, because we know that's what the widget is expecting, right? And we'll just set this to the night. And then we're going to need another variable, and this is going to be the actual mesh, right? And this is going to be of type skeletal mesh. And I'm going to go ahead and set it to the night. And we got to make sure it's the right one, because remember there was 2 skeletons. So there was that rigged, updated character rig one, and then the real one. So make sure you have the right one saved there. So now that that's done, we have the player struct set up. We go back into this player child mesh, and we're going to add that variable in. So this is going to be the, I'll just call it player mesh or player selection. And here's the player select struct. And you're going to want to, in the details panel, which some of you may have it down here, mine's over here because I like it on the right. You're going to want to set this to an array. And then when you hit compile, you'll see the player selection pop up here with members because now it's an array. And it's going to populate the default items for the first value. When you hit it again, you'll have a second. I'm going to go ahead and fill this in with soldier. SOLDI, yeah. And again, pay attention to the skeleton because this thing has two. All right, so we have the player selection struct array set up properly now. We know that we don't need colors anymore. We don't need to set the brush color. That actually does not exist anymore, right? And for the purposes of the widget, we're just going to be displaying the player image. So we're going to set the texture to the set brush from texture, right? So we know that this has got to go bye-bye, and this is what we're going to be doing now. And then we'll go to the next thing here. Now, how are you going to get the texture that you want? The same thing. We're going to grab the player selection, and we're going to do a get off of it. And you're going to feed the player choice into it. So we no longer need this, and we no longer need this because we're doing basically what we were doing there. And you'll notice you get this little structure output here. You can just split this. You can break it as well and then feed the texture in directly like this and hit compile. Now, again, the great thing about compile is it's going to say, okay, well, this, we obviously have another issue in this widget where it's trying to set the brush color. So that's where it's toggling between the two. The great thing is here, and I'm just going to organize this a little bit better. The great thing here is it's pretty much the same logic. It's just switching the player, right? So we can copy player choice, the array, and then the set. And copy this. Don't need that, don't need that, don't need that. And then compile. All right. I'm going to save this. So we are done with the player child mesh, right? So now the next thing is, in your head, you would say, okay, well, I might be done. And you would hit play, and you would hit enter, and nothing would happen, right? So, from here, you're like, okay, it's not giving me what I expect, right? And you're right, because it's still spawning the color. Remember, we duplicated the widget. So the next step in the chain is going to be go back here and you're going to try to change this to the duplicated widget, right? So inside of the game mode, input detector, show menu, add player. And here you're going to say, oh, okay, well, I just need to change that to child mesh, which is right. You do need to do that. But now you're going to get another issue, and it's going to say it's not compatible with the child object reference. And it's right, it's not, right? Because there's a return node here. So you have to update the return node to be compatible with the mesh. So there's going to be BPW child mesh object reference, and then hit compile, and you should be good to go, right? So the next, and we'll save this. The next step would be, okay, I'm going to hit play. I changed the reference for the widget. I should be good, but you know, you're going to blow up elsewhere because there's other stuff going on, right? So you hit cancel. Let's see why we're blowing up. And it's like, oh, okay, well, the function that was calling that player select panel is setting the child reference here inside of the input detector's indexed value get reference. So I know for some this is confusing, but it's just an input detector as the target from a selected index. So we go to the input detector, and there's a player child reference here. That needs to be changed as well. And this is where it's going to be like, oh man, I just blew up a bunch of stuff. So you change this reference, change the variable type. It goes through and it does it. And if I hit compile, again, this is where each one of these blows up. So the good thing is you duplicated this. So you can literally refresh this node to clear away the broken reference. And you can duplicate what you see here, which is called switch player. And target is, it's like from up here, you can see target is set and the direction is 1. So we'll get rid of this. And same thing here, we'll refresh this node. We'll call switch player. I'll leave it there because I want to reference what it was doing. It was a -1. And we wire this guy up. Delete that reference. Hit compile. Next thing in the line, player child ref. This should be good. Once we refresh, we can just wire it up because it's just a widget removed from parent. So that should be good. What's the next thing? And this is getting colors. Okay, so this is where the game mode spawns the player and passes the color, right? So if we have a color that's being passed in, we know now that we're going to have to add an input for the mesh, right? We don't really care about the image too much. That was for displaying, but we do need a mesh reference. So this is going to be skeletal mesh. And you can leave color there. I would actually prefer, like for me, I would leave it, even though I may or may not use it. And then, so it's passing color from here. This is the same as just wiring this up directly. You can just right click, get color, right? The variable is exposed and available to just get, so you don't have to have wires everywhere. But so now it says, okay, we don't have a mesh for the spawn variable, right? So that's where you would open the third person character up, and you would say colors part of my selected colors part of my config. Let me find out where that's being used at. So apparently selected color is being passed in to set up player parameters. So and it's being used on the construction script. So what we're going to do is here we're going to add the mesh. We actually don't need to be doing this anymore. So I can just scoot that out of the way. I mean, you could have kept it there if you want to keep the color logic in, but we don't need to do that. And then here we would just do set skeletal mesh for the setup player parameters. And we would wire up the mesh and hit compile. So that should be good to go for that. Yeah, we were here. Okay, and this is where we were feeding this in, right? So we need a reference. We need to expose this. So I'm going to promote this to a variable. And then I'm going to expose on spawn, and I'm going to set it to instance editable. Right? And again, we're not using color, but I'm just going to leave that wired up because we're just adding an additional parameter for the player. And we should be good though there. You'll want to come back to the game mode where you're spawning that third person character and hit refresh nodes, and you'll see this player mesh here, right? And your mesh is going to be here. We just set that up previously, so we'll just get mesh and wire that up. And then we need to come here, refresh nodes. I think this is good. Add player set, get target player child. Yes. So all of this is good. It's going to add player. It's going to come in here. It's going to set up this child, add to uniform grid. All of that's good. All right. At this point, I'm going to feel comfortable to go ahead and test. And again, we'll stop. We need to refresh this node. And this is where this has been updated to the mesh object. We're not getting colors anymore. You can scoot this over to the side if you want to and continue using it later. But from here, you would just get that player selection. And you see how it's doing the same thing from the color. You're just going to get a reference, and you're going to do player choice. Not a set. Get. My editor is starting to freak out. Get. Yeah. Get player choice. And then you would break your. Come on, you. You would split the. I don't know why my editor does this sometimes, but I am determined to get through this video. Freaking editor bug. 427, gotta love it. Anyway, we don't need this anymore. It's gonna continue to air out on me until I get rid of that, so we're not really feeding color anymore. We don't care about the image here. This is where we're setting to the mesh from the player selection struct. So we're just going to feed that in to this function that we were originally sending the color data into. Now we can compile. We'll come back. I'm going to scoot this down a little bit. We'll hit play, hit enter. So, okay, so what's happening here? Something else is happening, you know. So I'm gonna hit enter on nothing, just because I know it's gonna throw these errors at me, right? So it appears that something's going wrong in the player selection, and it is right. Look at here. What's happening is it's using the length of the wrong array, and this is where one of those like not cleaning up kind of comes back to bite you in GTH. And I'm having to do that blind because of this freaking editor bug. So we'll just change this out to be the player selection. And we've already done this here, so that's right. And this is the child. Yeah, so in this widget, we don't really need color unless we want to add it in later. We can add it back. So we hit save there, and now it cannot be the wrong one. It's using the appropriate length for the array. If we select the night, it is the night. So let's select the soldier, and it is the soldier. So hopefully that helps you guys kind of understand that process of how to go about this and retarget your animation, set up a skeletal mesh, and use the widget to select what character you actually want to play as. Until next time, guys, have a good one.